was worthy of adding to a Hall of Fame, with the watchword being, I guess, influential software, and the only requirement being that it has to run on some sort of Apple II. If, for instance, and we're doing it draft style, so if, for instance, Chris picks Bacon Taste as his most influential software title for the Apple II, that means that the rest of us cannot choose that title. So there's strategy involved, and there might be some sniping and some infighting happening, and it's all for your entertainment. So once Becky gets here, and I want her definitely to weigh in, and as her perspective is going to be different from my own especially. But I'm just going to fill air for a little while and say that we've got on the board, we've got software developers, we've got historians, bloggers, journalists, podcasters, and me. Yeah, I'm a couple of the above. No.
Sing a song.
I can do anything but sing a song. Oh, there she is. All right, we were just. Yes. I was just introducing everyone on the panel, and you were about half of the items that I listed. All right, so we are going to share a mic, if that's all right.
Fair enough.
Okay. You guys are wired. Ken's got his own, unless you'd like to share with Ken.
No, we're good.
Okay, so I figured this one's handheld. I can just hand it to Becky that way. All right, so without further, I think you need to turn it on if you haven't. There you go. So I'm going to kick it off with, we're going to go in this order with Chris Torrance, Peter Ferry, Ken Gagne, Berger Becky, and myself. I'm Charles Mangan, and that's the order we're going to go in. So Chris, kick it off with you with your first pick, if you will.
All right. I feel like this is really loud. Is that very better? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Okay. It's not too loud?
I want to hear you.
All right. All right. So my first pick is actually Olympic Decathlon. Ooh. So that was released by, I believe, Microsoft. I'm not sure exactly what year. It must have been 1982 or maybe even earlier, because I think I got it with my computer. And I really like that one just because I think it is a simulation. So it was the first game that I played where it was actually trying to simulate like reality. And so, you can imagine the arcade games with like asteroids and Space Invaders, but that's not something that obviously you would encounter in real life, whereas Olympic Decathlon, you could kind of put yourself into the shoes of someone like, I guess at the time it was Bruce Jenner, and just imagine yourself as this star athlete. And of course, me being a nerdy kid who couldn't really play sports, that, was this amazing thing to imagine that I could, be pole vaulting or throwing a javelin. And so my brother and I would just spend hours and hours mashing on the 1 and 2 keys to try and be the fastest one. And it's also a game that I think anybody can kind of pick up without a lot of knowledge about computer games. In fact, we had a party just a couple years ago at my house, and we invited like 50 people, and there was a bunch of kids. And so I brought out my Apple IIe and hooked it up to the the TV in our living room, and I had Olympic Decathlon going, and there was all these teenagers, ranging from like 12 years old up to 18, and they were all had so much fun playing Olympic Decathlon, and it was just a blast. So I think it's like a timeless game, and that's my pick.
How many keyboards did you go through?
Yeah,
especially those teenagers.
Yes, I think all the keys actually survived. So although I was a little annoyed because one of them actually beat my high score, because I did keep track of all of my scores from back in the day, and I still have the score sheet. But
anybody else want to weigh in real quick? Olympic Decathlon?
No, I mean, I have 3 older brothers, and my youngest brother and I would play that game all the time. And it's definitely a precursor to the Konami franchise Track and Field, which was very popular in the arcades and then later on 8-bit Nintendo. It's the same button mashing strategy that works so well, especially not just that, but also calculating angles for the javelin and the like. So there's math, there's timing, there's repetition. It's a lot of very different physical and mathematical skills.
Cool. Peter,
Fair enough.
your first pick?
My first pick is Degeneration. It was unreleased for the Apple II, but it ended up being released on the PC and became very popular. One of the things I like about it is it was probably the first of the sneaker games where if you ran in with guns blazing, you might end up not being able to complete the level. So instead you have to take a look at the level first, get a sense of what you have to do before you actually try and do any of it. And it also pioneered some of the graphical techniques we saw in some demos. So there's translucence in some of the objects, which we saw in the following years, what they call glens, and even deformed objects, which became the B-spline rubber techniques. It was just amazing.
Degeneration. Anyone else? Anybody? Who played that? I've never played that one myself. Oh,
I don't think I ever even heard of it.
anybody else?
I've never heard of it.
Played it? Okay. Well,
That's
obviously
sad.
influential in a different way.
Yeah, well, it went on to influence things like Metal Gear Solid, which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
and Thief,
Mm-hmm.
which is, they are certainly well known.
Yeah.
So even though we haven't played it, we should play it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the grandfather of the games you might have played, and you never even knew.
Sounds great. All right. Ken, you want your first pick?
Sure, thank you. So I am going to continue the trend of selecting a game, and my game of choice would be Lode Runner, the classic Broderbund published game by Doug E. Smith. I loved this game. I love the primary colors. It's basically red, white, and blue as you're running around trying to capture all that gold that the... What, do the enemies have a name? Bungling Empire. The Bungling Empire, because the sprites are the same as Raid on Bungling Bay, which was an 8-bit Nintendo game I absolutely loathed. Like, when I rented that game, I cried because I'd wasted so much money on renting that game. Like, one rental a week and this is it, and I have to play it. Crap. Because you play games you don't like because you have nothing else to do. But Lode Runner I loved. And one of the things I liked was that I remember when my dad got an accelerator card. I don't remember if it was a zip chip or a transwarp or something else, but he installed it and the game got faster and my reactions did not. So it was basically like a new difficulty setting for the game, where if I wanted to play it on fast or slow mode, just like Miss Pac-Man in the arcade, you control dip switches to choose how fast you want the game to be. And so I learned to play the game at fast speed, and it was so much fun. I also discovered on my own that if you push Control E on the main title screen, you get a level select, as well as perhaps a level editor. 100, you know. It worked once, and then after that, I had nothing to trade with, so they went back to beating me up. But for that one time, that one day, that one moment, I was cool. And then I got to go home and play Lode Runner, so that was cool. Oh, and I also like that it is a franchise that continues to this day. Like, there is a new Lode Runner Legacy game that just came out for Steam and Nintendo Switch. There was a game for the Xbox 360 a few years ago that had 2-player co-op that I learned that Juice GS Associate Editor Andy Malloy is terrible at. And that was fun, too, because it's Lode Runner. It can't not be fun.
Yeah, Lode Runner was definitely on my list, mostly because of the early level editor, being able to create your own levels as part of a meta game, and the fact that it's still relevant today. I mean, you still see it referenced as, you know, again, the watchword of influential on people's gaming careers and careers in creating games.
Yeah, it's been a frequent nominee to the Video Game Hall of Fame at the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, part of the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. It hasn't been inducted yet, but I think that's an oversight on their part and one I hope will be corrected.
Well, now it's in the Apple II Software Hall of Fame. Becky?
All right, my first one would have to be Castle Wolfenstein by
Yay.
Silas Warner. The game with a simple premise. Nazis are bad. Something we're dealing with again. But Talker was the only time it actually had voice synthesis on the Apple II, and this is like, as I'm understanding it, it's the first game to actually use voice synthesis as part of the gameplay. And of course, Castle Wolfenstein has spawned its own franchise, and it's still around even today.
Cool. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I would completely agree with Castle Wolfenstein. In fact, as a kid, I wasn't very good at it, but I made myself the challenge of trying to finish it, and so just like a couple years ago, I ended up, playing through the whole thing just on my Apple IIe and made it all the way to Field Marshal, and was very happy to do that. And in fact, Mark Lemmert is now spending all of his valuable K-Fest time doing the same thing, right?
Yeah, so I'm playing it on the big screen in the lobby.
Yep.
Learning all the tricks. I've never been very good at it, so learning tricks is good.
I mean, Castle Wolfenstein is another game that influenced Metal Gear Solid. It was one of the first stealth action games. And that speech synthesis that Becky was talking about, I found terrifying. If I was playing early on Saturday morning while the rest of my family was asleep, and a German guard burst in and suddenly started yelling at me, I would turn the computer off, because I just wanted him to go away. And I knew that was the only way to do it. Also, if I believe, this was the first game to ever be modded when they made Castle Smurfenstein. So that is another contribution to its legacy.
Yeah, definitely an early modded game, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if the mic stand is, oh, there you go, you got it. Well, I'm gonna break the trend of picking games, and I'm gonna choose ADT Pro by David Schmidt. As one of my very first Apple II acquisitions didn't come with any software. The floppy drive had nothing to do until I gave it some data to put onto a disk, but to put onto a disk via ADT Pro. And I think that's a lot of people's path into both ripping floppies into disk image, but also in getting disk images from the internet onto their Apple II. And it technically fits their requirements because the client software runs on the Apple II while the server software runs on your Mac or PC. Yeah, you can get disks from the internet onto bare metal with nothing but an audio cable and ADT Pro, and that gets a lot of people kickstarted into playing their favorite games from the old days.
Cool.
I see head nods. Anybody else? Yeah? All right, so that was round one. I don't know how we're doing for time, but let's go ahead and jump into round two with Chris.
All right.
Pick number two.
Number two is actually Crush, Crumble, and Chomp.
What?
So this is a Epyx, EPYX game. I actually just picked up this copy from the garage giveaway. I already have a copy at home, so if anybody actually wants this looks like a really clean copy. You can grab it from me afterward. So the premise of this game is you are a monster like Godzilla or some sort of terrible lizard creature, winged thingamabob, and you actually get to create your own monster, and you go around and terrorize a city and knock down buildings and burn up police cars, and it's awesome.
Can I see that?
Yeah. And I don't know, there's something about that game, just this leaving a trail of destruction behind you is just too much fun. But of course, in the end, the pesky humans, they always get you, and the mad scientist. The goal was to eat as many people as possible and last as long as possible. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. I don't know how influential it was. I think there was a lot of games actually that Epyx created after that. I think there was actually, there's some sort of, I forget the name of it, there's some other game that was based on this one that came afterward. Movie Monster, yes. So it was very influential in terms of like future games, but in terms of this particular title, I don't know how well it actually sold. So that's my
It
pick.
influenced you, and that's enough.
Exactly.
And there are several monsters you can choose to play as, including the Glob, Goshzilla, and Arachnus.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like a strategic take on Rampage.
Could be.
All right, Peter?
My next pick would be Karateka. The head-to-head action obviously results in games we see later, like Street Fighter. And yeah, I played endlessly on this one, especially the bird being such a nuisance. And kick through the door and immediately get kicked by Akuma because he can't see him right away. That was...
Is it called Apple Time Warp?
Yes.
The podcast with John Romero. Yeah, he talks really beautifully about the idea of telling a story with a game that has a beginning, middle, and an end. And it's a game. It's not an arcade game that's supposed to take your quarter after quarter and you just keep playing forever until you run out of money. It's a great departure from what came before it. And yeah, definitely, that was another one that was on my short list. So that's 2 of mine sniped.
I'm sorry.
But isn't it karateka?
He pronounced it karateka.
Yeah.
I'm especially a fan of the 2-player mode.
Yes, I was going to.
Oh yeah, we'll hear about that tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah, unless anyone else has thoughts on karateka or karateka or karate-ka. No? Okay.
I'm going to go with another game. This one is a 16-bit game, and that would be Dual Tris. I'm a big fan of Steve Chang's Dual Tris. It is a high-speed 2-player competitive version of Tetris. It has some original innovations, which I suppose is redundant, like power-ups that you can use to lower your stack of blocks. And there have been a lot of variations on Tetris over the years, and not all of them work. Like sometimes they try to add different shaped pieces, and that just messes with the basic formula too much, to the point that they're sacrificing gameplay just to be different. Dual Tris actually works, and the soundtrack is amazing. Like the fact that you can play this game with this amazing soundtrack blasting at you is fantastic. The guy who wrote it went on to be like lead game developer. No, I think he was like CEO of Zynga, the company that made Farmville, I believe. And he's doing other stuff now, and it's just remarkable the trajectory of his career and how it began with one of the best Apple II GS games, in my opinion. I would love to see a Dual Tris competition at Kansasfest. That's something that I was pushing for about 15 years ago. Hasn't happened since. Maybe I should be the one to make it happen.
The next game I'm going to choose is Wizardry. I'm an RPG fan, and before Wizardry came out, I played Dungeons and Dragons with friends. So we'd have our weeknight once a week. We'd get together, play some D&D, and all of a sudden this game came out for the Apple II, which is about the closest thing you could be playing a D&D game without actually having a bunch of friends. And its entire game design was modeled.
Another one that had a whole load of the whole franchise. Thank you for the word. Sorry, brain not work good. Yeah, a whole franchise after it with sequels and takeoffs, and it went multi-platform and everything else. So yeah, that was being sort of the innovator, and everyone copied it.
Yeah, Wizardry Labyrinth of Souls just came out for PS4, PlayStation 4 this summer, so it's still a franchise that's alive and well. And it's remarkable that for some reason that franchise really took off in Japan. And there have been a lot of Wizardry games released over there that we haven't seen.
Yeah. Plus, that game was somewhat unique at the time because there was all those kind of Easter eggs or cheats that you could do, which I think they were actually bugs. But for example, when you could get the 100 million experience points, and yes, exactly. So that was really interesting to find out that there actually were
To wrap up round 2, I'm going to pick a little one, a little tiny utility. Not even a utility. It has no utility at all. It's Apple Vision from Bob Bishop. It has high-res sprite graphics, a high-res character generator, music and animation at the same time. It looks like it's mixed mode between high-res and text, which blew people's minds, even though it's all high-res. The demo was something that he made, and then Apple picked up and distributed, and they didn't really give him much, and in the way of credit or anything other than it's on the disc. And then eventually he got a job out of it, and he went on to bigger and better things. But the influence of that showing up on your DOS disk when you boot up your Apple II in 1981, it's just mind-blowing. And how many people tried to emulate it or tried to create their own animation with sound and try to get those, those two things happening simultaneously, or figured out by disassembling his code and kind of created a generation of people that, if they were interested, they had something to emulate and something to inspire them.
And now we have streaming video.
And now we have streaming video.
Sound.
Yeah. All right, anybody else weighing in on round two? All right, so how are we for time?
Well, I think we're good till 7:45.
Oh, great.
Oh, I thought it was 7:30.
So,
The time was for an hour for the thing before. I'm not sure if that was different than what we have now, but you can go on. You got lots of time.
okay, well, if everybody's ready, we'll do round three. Round
Okay.
three, go.
All right, round three. Well, I guess since Mark Holzarski just entered the room, I really should pick a Penguin software title, but I'm not going to. Sorry. So my next title is not influential, and it's actually, I sound very quiet. It's actually somewhat controversial and an annoying little game called Firebug. But this is actually a Silas Warner game, and surprisingly it came out after Castle Wolfenstein because it's low res, it looks pretty junky, but it's actually highly addictive to the point where there was a school district in Michigan that actually banned the game because they thought it encouraged people to commit arson. Because the premise of the game is that you're this little pig with a tail, and your tail is on fire, and you're wandering through a maze, and you're trying to basically outrun your tail on fire while at the same time burning down the building. So I guess since my last pick was Crush, I must have this thing about destroying things. But the interesting quirk to the game is it was actually kind of a maze. So you were trying to find your way through a maze really quickly. You had to solve the maze so that you didn't get trapped. And then you could pick up little gas cans. This little pig could pick up gas cans and then drop them along the way, because you had to kind of strategically do that so that you could burn down all of the floor and get the most points. And then if you did that, then you went on to the next floor of the hotel and you burned down that floor. I'm not sure which way you were going. Hopefully you were going down. And it was just, I don't know, it was just this really highly addictive game that was just a lot of fun to play, and probably nobody else has heard of it.
I've heard of it. It was actually a fun game.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Peter?
My next choice is Rescue Raiders. Probably the first real-time strategy game that influenced things like Command and Conquer, where you have to manage resources, you have to buy equipment, and there's essentially a time limit that the longer you take, the fewer points you get, because the cost of war goes up as you go along. So the faster you finish the war, the less it costs. But still, it has a message that war is expensive, and I could spend a long time talking about the strategy that I used to defeat that. But or you could just cheat. Different versions had different passwords for the cheat codes, and so you'd know if you had a cracked version versus the original, because the crackers changed the password. But it was the whole idea of real-time strategy is still going today, so it's long-lived.
Is this game related to Choplifter?
The helicopter design is very similar, but it's head-to-head. So there's an enemy helicopter who also has an army of vehicles and people who are attempting to blow up your base while you're attempting to do the same.
So it's real-time strategy. Real-time strategy meets side-scrolling helicopter game.
Yes.
Most of the real-time strategy stuff ends up looking like a top-down RPG kind of a thing. But
Right, they changed the view when they had more resources.
All right, next.
So following the rule of threes, having chosen 2 games, I'm now going to deviate and go with Filatrix, which is a classic desk accessory, a CDA for the Apple IIgs from Carl Bunker from my own Massachusetts. And this is a ability to just enter into the menu from anywhere in the Apple IIgs and do stuff like copy, rename, delete, view text files. It's a great file utility that you can access from anywhere. So when I was running ProTerm or Spectrum or AppleWorks or playing a game, I just suddenly had to look something up, or if I want to copy my save data in the game before I died, I could go ahead and do all that. And it was great, especially when I was running at BBS. Warp 6 saves a lot of its data in text files. And so I could view those text files while I was running the BBS, or even if I was in chat with somebody. If I as the sysop, somebody popped in a chat with me and they asked, hey, how come I can't find this file, or where is this? I could just pop into that CDA and go browsing through all my files and directories and locate it or rename it or put it somewhere that he needs to access it, all without leaving that chat. So Filatrix was a great tool.
How are you spelling that?
FILE-A-TRIX. It sounds like not many people have heard of this tool.
I use it all the time.
Cool, you got 3 users.
Oh, you mentioned Carl Bunker. Is Bunkerware in the public domain yet?
So Carl Bunker, if I recall, had a website. It was like Iron Software, I think was the name of his company. And at some point, he did release all his tools to the public domain because they used to be shareware. I think that was the last update he made to his software, was a minor update to change the text in it. So I think that is something he did. I remember sending in my shareware fee as a check with a note saying, what program or what language did you program this in? Because I wanted to grow up to be a programmer at that point in my life. And he actually wrote back and said, I wrote it in assembly. And I was like, oh, maybe that's something I should learn. And I didn't. But at least I got to pay the shareware fee before he decided no more shareware fees were necessary. So.
So a GS utility.
I'm going to go for a GS utility as well. Pointless. The before Pointless was around, the Apple IIgs had distinctive fonts that when you printed out anything that we created on your 2GS, it had very blocky images, and it didn't look anywhere near as nice as what people were doing on the Macintosh. But then once Pointless was released, all of a sudden, documents being printed out on an Apple IIgs were indistinguishable from the Macintosh, which, as I understand from Apple Corporate, pissed them off immensely. So kudos to them for creating Pointless.
Always a plus if you can bite the hand that makes the apple. Anyone else use Pointless on their GS for printing and stuff? Yeah, a few people. Good. I never got into the GS, so the desktop utilities and things passed me by. All right, my next pick, I'm gonna go with Passport from 4AM.
Oh.
Yeah. So another recent addition to the pantheon of cracking tools for the Apple II and for the 8-bits, but the thing that makes it special is not only is it in the modern era, but it works on original hardware with your original discs, and you can crack stuff automatically. It's constantly being updated, and its feature set added to. I joke that it has become self-aware and will start cracking software on its own before you even approach it, but the author tells me that is not the case, so we can all rest a little easier tonight.
He would say that.
What's that?
He would say that.
He would say that. Yeah, and just as a model for modern development, it's being done collaboratively with a team of programmers and with modern tools, but sent down through the time tunnel to the 8-bit 6502 and running its code on original hardware and cracking floppies like it could have been made in the 80s. All right, so that's round 3. I told everyone to prepare at least 3 things, and I feel like we've gotten through round 3. This is the point in, and I just want to say I stole this format from a podcast called The Incomparable. So if you ever listen to The Incomparable, at the end of their draft shows, they do a Bring Out Your Dead. So last round, anything that you want to mention that has not yet been mentioned, go ahead and bring it out now. Anything that you want to comment on further that's already been mentioned, or something that you feel needs to be brought out into the light, please do. So start with Chris. Bring out your dead.
All right. I guess maybe I don't think it would be fair to leave here without actually mentioning Choplifter. I think we mentioned it a couple times, but specifically as a game, you talked earlier about the interview with Jordan Mechner, and he actually called out Choplifter as being heavily influential on him, and it was kind of his sudden realization that you actually could create games with a story, and they didn't have to just be shoot 'em ups. And I think that that's a perfect example of that. You know, your goal is to rescue the people, and shooting things, you may have to along the way, but it's sort of incidental. And I think that was kind of a game that combined those kind of elements really perfectly. So that's what I would throw out there.
I'd like to mention VisiCalc, because it's went on to influence just about everything about Excel and sheets and other things. And it laid the groundwork for the spreadsheet in general. It was an amazing achievement to get it to work on the 8-bit machine at all. And I still use a variant of it today. So.
I have 3 more utilities on my list, depending on how many people sniped me. They included ShadowWrite, which is the NDA for the Apple IIgs that is basically a word processor, also known as Herms or Hermes. And then I also had Quit2, which is another CDA by Carl Bunker, that basically when you quit a program, it immediately launches the next program that you select, instead of going back to the Finder or to a ProDOS 8 booter. But the top utility I was going to mention next was GS Shrinkit, which allows you to archive files and put everything into one volume. Because, like most people, I was really enjoying the online aspects of the Apple II. I was dialing into BBSs, running my own, dialing into CompuServe, Genie, and Delphi, and I was downloading every single game that was uploaded to the games library on CompuServe. You know, I would type Go App User, and then go into the library for games and just download everything. And none of that would have been possible if it hadn't been archived somehow. You know, Windows had zip files. There was another platform that had ARC files. Mac had SIT files. And we had SHK and BXY. And it was just invaluable. Both the Apple II version, the 8-bit, and especially for me, the GS version, GS Shrinkit.
For me, I'm going to pick 2 GS games that I found that just really inspired me to be better. The Immortal and Zany Golf. Because both of those games were just so well done and were from the ground up designed for the 2GS, and they really showed off what the Apple IIgs could do.
I'm just going to say it because I know that it's going to get mentioned before I leave the room, and it's going to be something that people probably have already thought of and dismissed because they figured someone else picked it, and I'm going to say Oregon Trail. Everybody's nodding their head. Yes, Oregon Trail was on my list. For me, one of the games that got me really hooked on playing games and reading stories in general is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that kind of represents for me all of the Infocom games. But it was one of their most popular and got a lot of people into not only interactive fiction or Infocom games, but sitting down at a computer and working out puzzles and trying new things as opposed to just shooting aliens. And the text adventure games were a big part of my childhood, and so they influenced me. And then I got into the books from there, and that's been a big influence on my taste in science fiction and comedy, and got me reading and all kinds of things. So Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is my last Bring Out Your Dead. We've got quite a list here. I'll go through it real quick, and then we can open it up to anybody from the audience that wants to comment or have a question, and then we'll probably we have something at 8 or at 7:45, you said?
8 o'clock is Solderfest.
Oh, Solderfest is in here, so we're going to have to you have some time to set up. So, the class of 2019 Apple II Software Hall of Fame, according to our panelists, is Olympic Decathlon, Crush, Crumble, and Chomp, and Firebug from Chris Torrance, D-Generation, Karateka, Rescue Raiders from Peter Ferry, Loadrunner, Dualtris, and File-A-Tricks from Ken Gagne. Rebecca Heineman picked Castle Wolfenstein, Wizardry, and Pointless for the GS. And my picks were ADT Pro, Apple Vision, and Passport, with a number of honorary mentions in the Bring Out Your Dead round. Anybody from the audience want to comment or question or? Yes. You can nominate if you want to. You can nominate for next year.
I was really surprised nobody mentioned Breakout by Steve Wozniak.
Breakout by Steve Wozniak, definitely influential. A lot of people probably listed that and edited it and modded it and tried to figure out how to work and make their own.
I mean, it's certainly of historical significance. I would rather play Arkanoid. I'm surprised, Charles, that of all of us up here, you're the only one whose top 3 picks didn't include any games.
Apple Vision's kind of a, no. I wanted to go away from games because I knew that they would be a very popular category, and I wanted to try and bring up things that were influential in other ways. And so I'm glad that some utilities and things that were non-games came up as well, and so that's good. And if you want to play Passport as a meta game, you can do that. Anybody else have a comment from here?
Obviously, I didn't grow up with these machines and these games, but I was kind of surprised that Adventure wasn't put up here.
Adventure
Colossal Cave.
Yeah,
or Colossal Cave? Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
thinking
Scott-
of
the
mentioning
Scott Adams
Zork as
match, yeah.
well.
Yeah. Well,
Dragon.
I tried to generalize which text adventure I wanted to nominate, and so I picked Hitchhiker's Guide myself because that was the one that I spent probably the most time on, me and my friends. Is there one in the back, Kevin?
Friggin' Visical.
He said visit.
He said
I
friggin'
did.
Visical.
I was in the
Yeah,
yeah.
it was in the honorary mentions, but yes, friggin' Visical. And over here.
Apple DOS. Apple beat everybody else in market share 2 years before your 80, Commodore, or anybody else had DOS. So Apple beat everybody to the market, gained market share, and without Apple DOS, you might not be.
There you go, Apple DOS. A nomination from the gallery. Maybe it'll come up in the class of 2020. But
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you want to participate in next year's panel discussion, we'll be here then. I see one more hand from the back.
Did somebody mention the print shop?
The print shop. No, it was not mentioned.
The print shop literally drove printer sales for years. You can track the popularity of print shop and printer sales in parallel.
For the folks on the stream that couldn't hear that, that was comment from the gallery. Mark saying that print shop drove the sales of printers, and you can match the rise and fall of printer sales based on how popular print shop was.
You know, I kind of wish I had mentioned ProTerm, which is a fantastic telecom utility. But then I eventually moved from that to Spectrum, which was not only a great GS telecom program, but also had a great scripting language. And I consider it one of the 2 languages besides BASIC that I ever felt comfortable programming in. When I needed to convert a straight HTML website into WordPress and into a data format, a structured data format that could be imported into a content management system, I wrote a Spectrum script to do it because I didn't know any other language, and I knew Spectrum could do it, and it did.
I didn't know, I mean, from my opinion, I would have
Graphical text adventure games, yeah, yeah. There you go. Coveted Mirror.
How could I forget Microzine? Like all 36 issues. They had so many great games just like that, a blend of text and graphics. I loved it.
All right.
What? I'm missing 4? Don't tell me that.
All right, I think last one, and then they're going to kick us out so that we can get Solderfest set up.
The Emon franchise.
Emon
That's a good
Adventures,
point.
yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Roll your own adventure games.
Yeah, definitely. Some authors probably got started there writing their own adventure games in that framework and then went on from there to do custom work.
And you can still explore the Eamon's Adventurer Guild online, eamonag.something, run by Matthew Clark.
All right, well, I want to thank you guys for sticking around and for joining us for the inaugural Hall of Fame draft. And our panelists, Chris, Peter, Ken, and Becky, and myself. I'm Charles, and I turn you back over to Dr. Steve.
Thank you all. And so at 8 o'clock is Solderfest. So if you're interested in making something, come on back down here. Tomorrow things start. I just looked at the schedule and I have forgotten what I saw. 9 a.m. I think it starts with the first talk. So have some breakfast, get here bright and early, and be ready to be wowed by more cool Apple II content. So enjoy your evening.
Thank you.